This clipper shocked the mastering world, but I did not believe the hype until I measured it and got into the weeds. Because when Sound Theory released Kraftur, everybody jumped on it for its multi-band clipping and loudness capability. But here's the deal. After reading the manual, I realized most people completely missed the boat on what this tool was actually solving. It's not just loudness, but intermodulation distortion. So with that, I want to give you some full transparency. This video is sponsored by Sound Theory, but that only happened after I dug into the weeds of this. And now they're having a Black Friday sale, which is 50% off every plugin from November 5th to December 5th. I wanted to share with you the link in the description below because in this video, I'm running controlled IMDD tests, listening tests, Crest-factor comparisons against standard clipper, and then blind testing this, the linearity on it, rating it out of 10 for clarity, loudness, and mix integrity. The reason is I really want to put this through its paces for you guys. So before you grab it on sale, you'll have a clear sense of where and if this belongs in your mastering chain. The first thing I want to show you here is the IMD test on Plugin Doctor. I'm actually going to show it to you in Pro Tools as well, so we have a full picture and we hear what this intermodulation distortion is and how it's solving it. So an intermodulation distortion test is here, 60 Hz sine wave being played against a 7 kHz sine wave, and intermodulation distortion is the sum difference parts of two separate frequencies being distorted in the same signal or process or processor. So what happens is you've got a 7 kHz sine wave playing, 60 Hz sine wave playing. The sum difference parts are as follows. 60 Hz take away 7 kHz is 6,940 Hz. So then you get that intermodulation distortion, that signal becomes present. 7,000 Hz plus 60 Hz is 7,060, and then you get that distortion playing. And that continues to sum difference at various degrees all the way down. That's why you got these little like pillars happening here, and this fold. Most of this folds out of the main harmonics, but then adjacent to each of them, let's go from single band clipping to multi-band clipping. All of those distortions around each of those fundamental signals which are being used for this test disappear. IMD is 0%. I'll bring this back to single. Boom, they're present. Multi, not present. So let's dive into this a little bit more. Here, I have an intermodulation distortion test setup. It's very simple. A 60 Hz sine wave, a 7 kHz sine wave, feeding a channel with Kraftur on, and we will be able to monitor and listen to this, and that's exactly what I want to do. So we're going to unmute this, and it's going to play nice and loud. There we go. All right. We'll mute that because I don't want to hear it or have it in my mic. What we've got here is 60 Hz, 7 kHz playing. That's beautiful. That's what we want to see. We're going to open up Kraftur, and when I unbypass Kraftur, we're going to see the harmonic distortions get introduced. Beautiful, that's what we want to see. Now, as I drag it from multi-band to single mode, you're going to start to hear the intermodulation distortion, and this is inharmonic. It has no musical relevance to the fundamentals because there's some differences. They're mathematical introductions to this signal or this signal path. And take a listen to this, what happens. It goes from harmonic to intermodulation distortion. Harmonic, intermodulation distortion. This static test shows the effect of it not in practice, in like a controlled environment. The uncontrolled environment are the mixes we get, because the mixes we get are all the components of individual signals or individual frequencies being summed together. So you've got adjacent frequencies in the same band, but they don't necessarily have the same effect of intermodulation distortion as low frequencies do when they're summing in a process, or when they're being processed by a non-linear processor like a distortion or a saturation plugin, where you've got low frequencies and high frequencies playing together. The intermodulation between opposing bands tends to be much more strong, but for all intensive purposes, this operates really well to minimize intermodulation distortions from opposing bands. Great. So I set up a crude test. Now this crude test is exactly that. Insanely crude. By the matter of the fact is because I'm driving this 18 decibels. So I'm going to play this through. Okay, I'm going to play this through. And I'm going to go from multi to single, and you'll hear a very crude evaluation of how this intermodulation distortion is affecting the clipper, or how the clipper changes from the single to the multiband, before we go into some refined tests where I've actually set up the clipper in more practical senses. But I just want to make sure we hear these effects so that we can clue into little things in the transients and the sustain of what's going on. Let's play this. You really hear it on the kick drum when it's coming in with everything else going on. It's not pleasant, the single band. The multiband does a way better job at managing the overall signal and pulling it together. Again, crude test. This isn't a practical solution or a practical use case. So we're going to move on to the refined test where I've got the multiband set up. I've set up the crossovers. I've got a much more conservative amount of drive. I've also noted the overall loudness and peak values. So I've got these as comparable as possible within 1/10 to 2/10 of a decibel of one another. And what this is going to do is this is going to give us an accurate representation of single band versus the multiband clipping. I'll just get these both up. I'll get the single band up top, multiband down the bottom, so we can see this and hear this and have a listen. And I want you guys to listen to just how single band can still be a good use case for clipping, but how the multiband in this circumstance, where you've got lots of transient, you've got guitar texture, you've got a lot of sustain, it deals with it beautifully. So take a listen to this. I think that's phenomenal. Like, for this particular track, it's great. It's doing a great job to keep everything sounding open and punchy and moving in a very kind way to the music. I don't like to use sort of airy-fairy terms. We're still assessing how this as a solution for managing intermodulation distortion is helping the musicality of this processor in controlling the ceiling, because one of the main reasons we use clippers is to gain headroom so we can level things up, and clippers all use different methods to do that. There's hard clipping, which just changes the values from whatever it is to 0. There's soft clipping, where you've got different transfer curves in, and this multi-band clipping that's been developed for this, especially the fact you can blend between the single to the multi, you can change the actual curves itself to actually have some knee or offset into the actual ceiling, is really useful. But just for the fundamentals of understanding why a multi-band clipper is helpful and how this has been developed to mitigate intermodulation distortion is great. Something I commend Kraftur on, or Sound Theory for developing Kraftur, is they focused on a particular problem that clippers brought about, and they've created a solution for it. And even this sort of triangulated blending of dry to single to multi sort of helps people navigate the use case of Kraftur, not just for the problem it solves, but also being able to have flexibility to blend in with the dry single, to blend in with a single band clipping based on the material, based on the tonality people want to lean into when they're using it. So I think that's a bonus. That's a good thing. Getting back to more to the practical test side, I set up standard clip here to match the transfer curve of Kraftur. I did that in Plugin Doctor. I tried to match it identically. So I got a single band following the transfer curve using standard clip, and then I got Kraftur because I wanted to have a like for like comparisons of a tool I'm using very often. I use standard clip. Kraftur's sneaking its way in, which is great. As in sneaking its way into my sessions now, which is great. I'm finding good use cases for it. But what I wanted to do is like for like transfer curve between the two. And I've even got clipping on the end of Kraftur, and clipping is a separate stage. Like, that is just hard clipping the output after the multiband section. So we are introducing a little bit more of that traditional clipping method. But I'm going to go to this point. Reason why we use clippers is mainly to gain headroom. So that means the crest factor is really important. I got both of these tracks to a crest factor of 11 and have them level matched, which is important. So now we can hear an apples for apples comparison between the standard clip and the Kraftur. So we can hear what does traditional, just normal full band clipping versus multi-band clipping sound like in the goal of using a clipper to gain headroom. So no longer are we assessing the intermodulation, distortion, and manipulating the settings to focus in on that. We're focusing in on a main goal in mix buses and mastering, which is making things louder. So again, they've both got the same identical crest factor. Let's have a listen to this. Standard clip, and then into Kraftur. So standard clip first will play, and then it'll loop Kraftur. Let's have a listen. I'm pretty happy with both of these. If anything, Kraftur, the multiband, I get a lot more breathing room in the drums, which is really important, especially in the low end of the kick. A little bit more depth, a little bit more separation, which is nice. The standard clip is really cool for that sort of like gooiness. Like, I like the fact that it's not affecting everything underneath the ceiling. Kraftur, because it's multiband, I feel like there's that little bit of depth is great. And I personally, on a subjective level, prefer the Kraftur version. However, because it's doing a little bit more than just taking the whole band, clipping the signal off the top, and it's compartmentalizing it into single bands, clipping the single bands, and then recompiling it, it is shifting the depth of everything a little bit. And that's not a negative thing. I actually think it's enhancing what's there, but it's just something to be conscious of as a whole. Now, linearity. I think that's a good test that speaks for itself. You guys can enjoy this. Now, linearity is really important when it comes to processors, and this is something that sort of got me hung up a bit, and I had to run some A/B tests, because what I'm going to show you might not be favorable technically in Kraftur being a mastering grade tool, but I think it's important to show what is on paper, and then we listen to it, because when we have something on paper, it's not always represented with what we're listening to. So we've got the linear analysis of Kraftur, and we've got these sort of humps and bumps and whatnot, and we look at the phase, and this is in the linear phase mode focus. If I take it out of linear phase, everything's bumping up and down. I put into linear phase, it's pretty clear, but the frequency is still dipping and rising all over this joint. I go to something like a Hammerstein graph, which is really good for non-linear processors to actually identify these things. And you've got these third order and fifth order harmonics, which of course that's what clippers are going to do in their processing. But it's more so this curve here at the top, that fundamental which shapes around, which I'm interested in. So we're going to get to some listening tests, some blind listening tests actually in a moment. But before we do, I'm going to go through some things here. I've got a sync wave here. And what we're going to do is a traditional sync wave, like graph plots like this. Now I've got the FFT size down really low. The higher the FFT, the more visibility or the more resolution you get frequency. The lower the FFT, the more resolution you get in the time domain. And I'm very concerned with the time domain because Kraftur is oversampling internally, going up and down, and then it's got filters as well to separate it into bands, and that introduces a time domain element to this because you're changing the phase and using impulses in the time domain. So when I get rid of focus mode here and I render this sync, whoa, there's a large impulse in the low end. Now, the problem with this graph here, which isn't necessarily all that accurate with what's going on, is the fact that we're looking at information that is down to negative 120 decibels that we're never going to hear. So let's just, before we change the range, we're just going to Control Z there. We're going to put the linear mode in and we're going to render it. And we can see that we get pre-ringing, post-ringing. But again, it's showing an amplitude range of negative 120. Are we going to hear signal pre-ringing negative 120 decibels below the fundamental? Because, man, this is an impulse. This is an impulse being tested and processed. It's pretty far out there. So what I wanted to do here is we'll Control Z this again. I'm going to go negative 60 because I think negative 60 is much more fair. We go to normal, which is not linear phase, and there's a little bit of post ringing, and that to me is like, is that audible? We're going to have a listen in a sec. We go to focus mode, the linear mode, and we render it. And almost nothing. You just see the pass band at the top for the upsampling and downsampling. That filter shave off some of that air. Okay? So that's the linear version is looking better in an audible range as opposed to the non-linear version. That low end's a little bit odd. Now, we're going to run some delta signals. We're going to do a blind test because I think the blind test is going to be very telling. Let's have a listen to each of these. I've got Kraftur set up on all these two. Okay, there's no real processing Kraftur's doing in the gain domain. It's just that I've got one in natural mode and then one in linear phase mode. So it's just passing the signal, no drive into the clipper, just what's actually happening in the linear state of this plugin. Is it affecting the signal in a negative fashion? Okay, the natural mode to me, I'm going to loop the kick drum here, I think it's doing something to the low end I'm not too fond of. Take a listen to this. Let's just get this looped. All right, 3 for 3, that's pretty easy to identify. The linear one is a little bit more tricky, and I did run these tests before I ran this video, just so I could really lock into the nuance. The linear one is around the knock, and I can pick it out, but it's actually really tricky. I reckon if I try to do this, I reckon I'll get it 50% of the time. So I'm just editing the video down now, and before I show you these linear A/B tests, I have to let you know, unfortunately, my screen recording stopped capturing the audio from my DAW. I got 3 out of 3 on the blind test. I'm going to show you them in my commentary. It's just that the audio is going to be coming from my microphone and not the system DAW, unfortunately. And I didn't want to omit this from the video because I think there was some really important information and little clues I cite when doing these tests. I just want to loop something here. Can I loop a kick? Let's loop a kick. I think that's the OG. It's got a little bit more of an open knock. Let's show the track. Boom. We got it. Let's loop it again. Boom. Got it again. Let's go 3 for 3. It's a little bit telling. It's a little bit telling. And this is probably the one hang up I have, knowing I can pick up these tonal changes. Let's go 3 for 3. I'm going to shut my mouth. Let's try 3 for 3. That first kick's nice and deep, so it's easy to get the giveaway on it. No, the top one's OG. Am I right? 3 out of 3. Look, that's my one get up with this plugin, is that both in focus mode and not in focus mode, so whether it's linear or non-linear, it is changing the tone of everything ever so slightly. Now, those are really hard blind tests. Just listening through it, it's like, oh, do I hear something? Do I not hear something? Is there something there? Is it a bad thing that it's changing that? You know, like, I'll tell you this, not all the tools I use in my mastering chain are completely one-for-one linear. Every processor imparts something in some capacity, and in doing that, what ends up happening is you lean into and you get used to a little bit of what a particular processor is doing. So by that I mean, let's say you got something a bit too boomy, but you know a particular processor, just even in not doing anything, just having it in the chain will make it a little bit brighter or choke the low end a bit. That's what I use God Particle for. It can choke the low end a bit. Just putting that in can achieve something for you without actually having to go tweaking. Right, so now to sum this up, we need to transfer objective claims, subjective findings into tangible scores. Now, these tangible scores are my scores. I would give this. So for clarity, I'm giving this an 8.5 out of 10. For loudness, I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. And for preserving integrity, I'm giving this a 7.5 out of 10. This tool is awesome, and I think for anything like the material I presented to you here today, anything with lots of transients and texture or sustain, this had really nice textural guitars in between the punch of the drums. This is where this shines for me. At least when I've been using it in sessions, this is where it shines. So with that, I want to thank Sound Theory for sponsoring this video, making this all possible for me to put this together, and for you guys, it's 50% off at the moment for Black Friday sale. There's a link in the description. That is a steal. And until next time, take care.